study the patterns of the universe.
Advancement in the brain. Virtual your mind. Talking about your life. Fundamental principles.
Philosophy.
What is and what is not true.
Those who know themselves.
Being better every single day.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Think Grow podcast. I'm your host, Ruben Chavez. And today I wanted to build upon some of the ideas that I had introduced in the last episode. So previously I was talking about this idea of acceptance and how it's kind of spoken about in different ways by different people. So for example, the Buddhists, they talk about it when they talk about mindfulness and acceptance and non-judgment and things like that. The Stoics have a term for it. It's called acquiescence, to kind of submitting yourself to whatever's happening. Nietzsche has this idea of amor fati, which is loving your fate. And there are many different ways to talk about this, but fundamentally they're all kind of the same thing, which is you have to be able to deal with reality and you have to be able to engage with reality on its own terms, regardless of what your preferences are, because that's just how life goes. And so the ability to do that is, I think, the master skill of life, because that's what we're always doing. We're always engaging with reality and with unknown and often unpleasant circumstances. So if you're able to do that, then you've really unlocked one of the major keys to life, I think. Anyway, I kind of unpacked those ideas in the last episode of the podcast, but I want to, in this episode, give you a tidier way to conceptualize this idea, because I think one of the major problems with implementing personal development approaches is that if it's too complicated, it won't be implemented. And so, what's the saying? Complexity is the enemy of execution. So with that in mind, I want to give you a very clean and simple way to conceptualize this idea so you can kind of use it in your daily life and hopefully have it impact your life in a positive way. So I've been thinking about it, and what that is integration. I think everything I'm talking about can be summed up in the concept of integration. Let me try to explain what I mean by that. When we talk about improvement, when we talk about self-development, what we're actually talking about is integration. If you look at the idea of mental health, for example, just psychological health, what that is it's basically the ability to integrate difficult situations and difficult emotions into your experience in an effective way, right? I mean, that's fundamentally a huge part of psychological health. And, when that goes off the rail, you get things like PTSD and anxiety disorder because you're not able to integrate certain experiences into your life properly. Okay, so let's look at another idea or construct, which would be like courage. If you think about courage, what is it? Courage is the ability or the capacity to integrate that which threatens you or that which you are afraid of, integrate it into your life rather than avoid it or rather than separate yourself from it or ignore it. And so that would be the opposite of integration, separation or avoidance or, ignoring. And so that's another example of integration. You're facing the things that scare you rather than turning away from them. Another example of integration is self-awareness. This is a huge concept in personal development and in kind of actualizing our potential. It's the ability to be authentic and know yourself and use that information to engage with the world in an effective way. And what self-awareness is fundamentally is the ability to integrate those parts of yourself that are hidden, the parts of yourself that you deem unacceptable and have kind of disowned to a degree. This dovetails perfectly with Carl Jung's conception of the shadow, which he was, I think, one of the first people to elucidate this concept of integration in the sense that you need to integrate those parts of your psyche, as he called it, that were disowned. The benefit to that is you become a more whole person. Developing a persona and a personality that people can actually engage with and that is acceptable to the world is a normal process of ego development. But in that process, you also create a shadow, which is basically the parts of yourself that you kind of tamp down so as to get along in society and exist as part of a culture. But it is necessary at times to integrate some of those disowned parts, maybe all of those disowned parts, into your personality in a way that's functional and productive. So, just a quick example. Let's say this is a very common one, I think. If you're a person who is very polite and doesn't want to make waves and kind of goes with the flow, or is passive, I guess you could say, and basically goes along with whatever else anybody else wishes, well, that may help to, you're more agreeable in that case. And that may help you to get along with people. That may be beneficial in certain instances, but it can be a drawback. And of course, there are times in life when you need to be assertive and you need to actually own the aggressive part of your nature, but not in a destructive way. And so this is why integration is so important and kind of a nuanced concept, because it's not that you want to just be an aggressive a-hole. You actually want to tame those parts of yourself. That's why it's not just, hey, I'm going to be the shadow. It's, I'm going to acknowledge the parts of myself that maybe I have left unacknowledged for a long time. And then I'm going to consciously and mindfully integrate those aspects of my personality so that I can have a greater toolkit from which to pull when I'm dealing with the variety of situations life throws at me. Okay. So that's another example of integration. Hey there, just wanted to take a quick moment to let you know about one of our sponsors for this show, KiwiCo. Really excited to partner with this company. If you have kids, or if you're a kid at heart and just want to spark your curiosity and kindle your creative thinking, you might want to listen up. As many of you know, my wife and I had our first child in 2019, and this kid just has an insatiable curiosity. He's always hungry to learn, so naturally we're always on the lookout for companies that can help us give him the cognitive stimulation that he wants and needs. And KiwiCo has come in really handy for this. They deliver hands-on science and art projects for kids of all ages, 0 to 104. You can engineer a walking robot, conduct bubbling chemistry experiments, or design a paint pendulum. All sorts of different activities to choose from. We recently received a crate that our little guy loves and has been playing with joyfully for the past several days. He's almost 2, so this particular crate had counting activities and some hide-and-seek activities that he really seemed to enjoy. One of the things my wife and I love about the crates that KiwiCo sends is that they're all analog projects. And this means our little guy really needs to be actively engaged in order to interact with it. And that's really important to us. And they're also really pretty. They're aesthetically pleasing. They have kind of an old school vibe to them, kind of like they were made in Santa's workshop, often out of wood and other sustainable materials, which we really like too. So this is a great gift for the holidays, and especially at this time when parents and kids alike are spending more time at home, it's a great way to add some variety. KiwiCo is redefining learning with hands-on projects that build confidence, creativity, and critical thinking skills. There's something for every kid or kid at heart at KiwiCo. Get 50% off your first month plus free shipping on any crate line with code TGP at KiwiCo. That's 50% off your first month at KIWICO.com. Promo code TGP. Just in general, if you think of the concept of mindfulness, this is a huge topic of research in the past decade or so. Mindfulness is about integrating our experience, whatever that may be. And it's about noticing what's happening in the moment, as opposed to being mentally and emotionally not present. And so mindfulness is the practice of noticing and observing and including whatever it is happens to arise in your experience, whether they be thoughts or emotions or sensations, including that in your experience rather than avoiding it or running from it. And so these are, foundational concepts in personal development and in just becoming a more well-rounded person. Here's another one. Resolving disagreements. Like if your goal is to resolve a disagreement with someone, then part of what you want to do is you don't want to dismiss their viewpoint. You don't want to ignore what it is they're saying, because that's only going to make them dig their heels down further into the sand. What you want to do instead is you want to integrate their viewpoint. You want to get their viewpoint out onto the table, include it in the conversation, and then maybe you can interact with that viewpoint. You can help them construct their view in a credible manner, and then you can interact with that viewpoint in an effective way so you can hopefully come to some kind of agreement, right? Or some kind of resolution, some kind of understanding. And that's fundamentally what resolving disagreements is. Again, the concept of integration is present there. You're integrating the other person's viewpoint into the conversation. So the idea of integration is the idea of acceptance. It is the idea of mindfulness. It is at the bottom of these very important and foundational principles of personal development. And I think it actually is personal development. I think that's actually what we're doing is when we're developing ourselves, we're integrating more things. And in that sense, integration is improvement. Integration is actually the highest form of improvement, because when you integrate something, you have the old model, you have what you started with, but you also have something new. Ken Wilber, the modern philosopher, he talks about this idea of transcending and including. And he talks a lot about kind of the stages of civilization and how one stage provides the foundation for the other stage of civilization. And it's the same idea. It's transcending the previous stage, but including elements of it to create something better. And that is kind of a definition of better. Jordan Peterson points this out too in some of his psychological lectures. If you want a definition of better, it can do what the old thing does and more. And so that's what integration does. The opposite of this is, as I've said, to ignore and to separate and to avoid. And modern psychology, as well as ancient wisdom, tells us that this is generally a bad idea. And the reason it's a bad idea is because life is not just one thing. Right? Life is many things. Life's not just one pleasant idea. It's not a concept that is filled with just positivity. Life is also the good, bad, and the ugly. It's everything. And so when we try to cherry pick our experience and cut ourselves off from different portions of life that we find unacceptable, those things don't go away. They just go into the darkness and they kind of fester. And as anybody who has ever ignored a problem will tell you, they get worse. And this is true for external problems as well as internal emotional issues. If you ignore it, it gets worse. And that's kind of the principle at the bottom of this idea, is that whatever it is we ignore, whatever it is we disown, whatever it is we avoid, it doesn't go away. It gets worse and it gets harder to deal with. So the idea to counteract this is to integrate it, to learn how to approach life in a manner in which you are integrating experiences into your life rather than avoiding them. This doesn't mean you approve of everything that you encounter, or doesn't mean that you necessarily want it. Although I think you can get to a point where you view problems as challenges and as beneficial, but even if you don't get there initially, I think the idea is to approach things with the idea, approach circumstances, approach emotions, approach life in general with the idea that you're going to include this in your experience and you're going to learn how to sit with it. And this practice done over and over again in initially small doses and then gradually on a larger scale is really what building psychological flexibility is all about. And psychological flexibility is this big idea in psychology that it's the capacity to deal with circumstances in the variety of different circumstances, positive, negative, with different sets of tools and with different psychological approaches, and to be able to adapt to circumstances and to be able to adapt to difficult situations and to be able to overcome or deal effectively with your emotions and other people's emotions. It's a very broad construct, but it's basically what I've come to believe, the goal of all personal development. So although, yes, it is a big concept, it's really the only concept that I think we need to be concerned with. And this idea of integration, I think, is one step on the way to practicing and building this trait, if you want to call it that. So I hope this has been helpful. And that's all I have to say. Have a good one. Hey, thanks for listening. You can find the show notes for this episode and all other episodes on my website at thinkgrowprosper.com/podcast. That's where I put all the links and resources mentioned in each episode. It's also where I put the outlines of topics covered, which is a really good way to refer back to episodes in the future. Lastly, if you enjoyed this episode, I'd love to hear about it. Feel free to leave a review on iTunes with your biggest takeaway. I make it a point to read all the reviews. You can also screenshot this episode and share it to your social media along with something you learned or found interesting. And tag me in your post because I'd love to see what you found interesting. Say hi and thank you for your support.